I'm reading this mind-blowing book right now. It is called Staying with the Trouble. It is by Donna Haraway, who is an academic, feminist, activist, scientist slash cyborg. She also wrote the Cyborg Manifesto I've talked about previously. I basically love her. In this book, she talks about different ways that we can go forward with the damage we've done to our ecological systems and social systems. Like, basically, how do we keep surviving as humans on this earth? And she begins to posit some really interesting ideas for recuperation, like how to fix some of the damage that we've done, socially, ecologically, ethically. She talks a lot about science fiction in this book, which is really interesting, tying basically the concept of the stories that we tell in science fiction, science fantasy, speculative feminism, she posits, and like how meaningful they are to helping us recuperate. Like, she often says it's important what stories we tell stories with. So who is telling those stories, and where does that power come from, and how does that perspective basically inform history and how we move forward? As a role player, storyteller, and role-playing designer, obviously this is of interest to me. My media is storytelling. And so she, in this chapter, is talking about specifically Ursula K. Le Guin and Octavia Butler as two science fiction, speculative feminism authors who talk about different ways of worlding, communicating, and recuperating damage from various forms. In Octavia Butler, it's often dealing with racism, slavery, and histories of forced travel or immigration. And for Ursula K. Le Guin, it is on different worlds using metaphors to kind of communicate through gender and language. The most powerful thing I've read so far, though, is this essay that she mentions from Ursula K. Le Guin, where she talks about the pouch theory? That's not right. I had to look it up. The carrier bag theory of fiction. I had never heard of this before. So the concept is that, lots of history, lots of fiction lots of myth is told through the male gaze lens. It's it's not exciting to tell the story of the gatherer of seeds and the carrier of babies. It's exciting to tell the story of the man who goes out and slays the mammoth. And how basically rare that action was to early humans. The majority of humans, we were gatherers, we ate seeds, but where is the interesting story there, she says. But the lie about that is that there are interesting stories there. They're just not masculine or, cis male stories. So she kind of creates this dichotomy of the sword versus the bag. Like the sword is this traditional male story, how lots of history and fiction is told, and how our stories are told. They're the protagonists and the hero's story. Whereas the bag carrier, the seed carrier, is often a passive story that doesn't get told, or is more feminine in nature. And that made me think about D&D. Follow my logic train here. The thing that happens in D&D that I think I dislike about it, that I've talked about before, is what stories do we use to tell stories? It's the masculine story. It's the the sword carrying story. It's the violent story of going out, exploring, conquering lands, stealing money, and killing things. And I know people are gonna say that's not every D&D story. You can make any D&D story how you want. But the thing about games is that the story that you're telling is based upon the incentivizing that's in the game. So if you present people with monsters and swords, they're going to tell a story about killing monsters with swords, because the enemy is the monster and the solution is the sword. What if, instead of the enemy being a monster, being an orc of another race, person of another race, of people who live over there being the enemy. What if instead the enemy was, famine or disease or the destruction of the world? What would the story be then? What if you, instead of weapons, instead of a sword, your protagonist was given a bag? And that's what Ursula K. Le Guin and Octavia Butler do in their storytelling. I mean, they literally have, sci-fi tales about people who are heroes, our protagonists, women who are heroes, mostly, who, are these seed bag carriers. In Parable of the Sower, sour is in the title. The main character's superpower and greatest weakness is her empathy. And it is the end of the world, it is the apocalypse. And she carries seeds with her to plant in order to heal her communities. That's such a powerful story, and one that we don't really see too often in tabletop role-playing games. It's important which stories tell stories. Who's writing these games? From what perspective are we telling these stories? What is the dominant narrative in tabletop role-playing games? I mean, in D&D and Pathfinder, all of the big titles, it's about fighting monsters, it's about colonizing. It's not about planting seeds or healing or recuperation of communities. There are fantasy myths, folk tales, that do mimic this type of story, in Parable of the Sower, the main character's middle name is Oya, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, I apologize, but she's an African goddess, I believe, goddess ancestor, who, is of the land and the wind and death. And a lot of those tales surround these types of stories, and all kinds of creation myths and folktales from all over the world tell these types of stories. It's not always about the sword. I'd encourage you to go out and read that essay. I'll link it down below. And if you want some more academic thickness and a little bit of sadness and hope, definitely read Staying with the Trouble by Donna Haraway. It's an excellent book. I'm not all the way through it yet, but I've learned so much, only like 30% of the way in. And it's got me thinking a lot. Got me thinking a lot about the types of stories I want to tell stories with in my games. Have you ever played a role-playing game where you're the carrier of a bag instead of a sword? I can think of a few off the top of my head, maybe like Golden Sky Stories and things like that. Maybe a Cozy Den, my Lesbos Snake game, which, it does actually fit that criteria. I didn't realize how much my mind was trending towards these ideas when I wrote that game, I think. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear your opinions. And please hit the like and subscribe button. I'm trying to grow my channel to get some more viewers on here and spread the good word. So thanks so much for watching, and consider the stories that you tell stories with. I'll see you next vid.